Chapter 16. Over the next few months, Ramirez taught his pupil the real art of fencing and swordplay. His skill with the weapon was beyond any measure that Connor could apply to it. "How did you learn all this?" he gasped one day when Ramirez had disarmed him for the 7th time. "I've had a long time, and many teachers myself. Teachers from lands which would mean nothing to you. Just names." Connor nodded. "And another thing." "What?" "If the Immortals are to fight for the prize, though you say you don't know exactly what it is, then we will have to fight each other. Why are you helping me?" Ramirez leaned on his sword and looked out over the uplands with a wistful expression on his face. "Good question. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that I shan't be there. It's just a feeling, mind, but it's strong. I shall be one of those that fall by the wayside. I think I've lived too long already. There are no more surprises." "Are you afraid of death?" "I've no great fondness for it, but I'm sure it has a good use. Sometimes I think we're the unlucky ones, the freaks of nature that have to suffer longer than ordinary men. Now," he said, sheathing his sword, "we must go for our run along the beach." Connor made a face. "I hate all this running." "You have a gift, and it's enclosed within that body of yours. The least you can do is keep the container in prime condition. Swordsmanship is a matter of fitness as well as skill. Hard work. No talent is worth anything without hard work." He flicked Connor's claymore up into the air, and the Scot caught it, immediately attacking Ramirez, hoping to catch him off guard. Ramirez blocked the blow and kicked Connor's legs from under him. Furious, the Scot leapt to his feet and rained blows on the Spaniard's head, which were all parried. Then he was disarmed again. "Never lose your temper," said Ramirez quietly. "If your head comes away from your neck, it's all over." He sheathed his sword again. "Come on, to the beach." He began running down the hillside, and Connor reluctantly followed. "Come on, MacLeod! Why am I always in front? Can't you beat an old man? I'm 20 times older than your grandfather." The insults always had their effect, despite the fact that Connor knew why Ramirez used them. It spurred him on to greater efforts, the words pricking at him, wounding his pride. A clansman's pride was a tender thing, not difficult to pierce, and Ramirez remorselessly jabbed at it with his sharp insults. He ran and ran and ran. After the run along the beach, with the salt air filling his lungs and the spray cooling his face, Connor felt better. Although the race had been won by Ramirez, yet again, he was beginning to gain on the Spaniard. He was beginning to see and feel some results of the training. They fought again in the woodland near the shoreline, using the trees as shields. At one point, Connor thought he had avoided a blow rather expertly, only to have the thin tree behind which he had ducked come crashing down on him. He looked up at Ramirez in despair. The Spaniard laughed. "Ha! You'll get there, MacLeod. Don't look so disheartened. You continually overextend your thrust. We'll cure that with balance." "Balance, balance," grumbled Connor. Always balance. Always, confirmed Ramirez. I'm glad to see you're thinking about it at last. They ran back up the hillside to the croft. Ramirez was there long before him, and Heather was waiting, smiling, as Connor came panting up to the well. "Connor," she said, as he was leaning, exhausted, against the stone wall. "Heather, please." She shrugged and went indoors. After a while, he followed, to find Ramirez eating. "Food," said the Spaniard. "Sit, build up your strength." Connor slumped into the wooden chair and began to eat. He was beginning to wish he had never met the Spaniard, and was wishing him to hell. "If it came to just the two of us," he asked after they had finished their meal, "would you take my head?" Ramirez got up and came to Connor's chair. He drew his sword and offered it to the Scotsman, then went down on one knee, lowering his head. Connor sat there, stupidly holding the blade, while Heather looked on from one man to the other. All Connor had to do was deliver a single stroke, and he would be rid of the man. He tossed the sword onto the table, and Ramirez climbed to his feet again. "Does that answer your question?" "No. What if you're wrong? What if you do live until the gathering?" Ramirez said, "We must fight until only one remains. That is all I know. If you don't fight, then you will not be the one." Heather said, "All this talk, I don't understand it. You're friends. A hoggy with one eye could see that. Practice your sword fighting all you like, if you must, but no more of this talk of killing each other. Why don't you hug like brothers and show your feelings, instead of pretending like you're enemies? Come on, the pair of you." Ramirez looked at Connor and opened his arms. Connor stared at the table. "Connor!" said Heather. He looked at her, and her mouth was set in a firm line. He climbed to his feet, clumsily knocking over the chair as he did so. He bent to pick it up. "Never mind that," said Heather. Connor walked forward, and the two men hugged. "Brothers," said Ramirez. "Brothers." "There," said Heather, brightly. "That wasn't so bad, was it? Now, help me clear this mess from the table." 2 days later, they again raced on the beach, while a stag looked on from the edge of the woodland. "Let yourself feel the stag!" shouted Ramirez over his shoulder. "His heart beating, and his blood coursing. Feel it!" Connor concentrated, and after a few moments he felt the joy, the exhilaration of high speed. He felt all his tiredness drop away from him, and a fresh, new energy enter his limbs, his chest. The stag's heart was his heart. The stag's lungs were his lungs. The secret of the Highland beast's speed was now his. "I feel it!" he screamed into the wind. "Come on!" cried Ramirez. "I feel him! Come on! I'm coming!" For the first time since they had met, Connor passed the Spaniard. "Come on, Haggis!" Ramirez laughed. "I'm close!" he shouted. The Spaniard drew up alongside the Scot, and the two of them challenged the wind. Unidentifiable joy filled their hearts. This was life. "This is the quickening!" shouted Ramirez. At the end of the run, they both fell into the water, and after splashing around, began to fence furiously in the shallows, with Ramirez crying, "Yes! Yes! All it took was the right frame of mind. Now, pendejo! Now!" The blades clashed. Salt spray was everywhere, in their eyes and hair. It ran in rivulets down their backs. They sank to their ankles in the shifting sands, and still they fought on, neither gaining an advantage over the other. "You have it!" cried Ramirez. "Very good! Balance! Balance!" Parry, thrust, lock, part. Connor felt part of it all. The elements, the sea, the earth. "Shall we see what you've become?" cried Ramirez, and he went into the attack. They locked swords. Connor took a step back, feinted, and then whipped the Spaniard's sword from his grasp. It flashed through the air, to land point first in the beach. He laid his blade on Ramirez's throat. They stood like that for a few moments. Then Connor put aside his sword and reached out with his hand. "Brothers," he said.